The Prime Minister's given assurances that the government will keep funding other school food programs alongside its just announced $45 million lunch program. But there's no details of exactly how the new service will be delivered. Individual schools are being left to decide that themselves. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told us via live view from Rotorua that today's announcement is hugely important to her.
People have heard me talk enough about some of my motivations for being in politics to know how important this is, not just the food in schools, but the whole child and youth wellbeing strategy. I think if we, as politicians, focus our minds on the well-being of kids, then we will be fixing so many of those long-term challenges and setting ourselves on a really solid path for the future. It is going to take us some time, though, and so while we've made some really great progress, particularly on child poverty, the Food in Schools program is our way of acknowledging that in the meantime, the least we can do is make sure that those kids who need it most are getting food in their tummies and are ready to learn.
So, food in schools, 20 schools for the pilot as such. How have you chosen those schools?
So we're starting, yes, with roughly about 5,000 students. We have focused in particularly around the Bay of Plenty area, around the East Coast. There'll be some in the South as well. We're looking at a cross-section of schools that will give us an idea of, how to deal with area schools, how to deal with rural schools, schools where they may have a breakfast program, just to make sure that we get the settings right. Then by 2021, we'll be moving into 120 schools covering 20,000 children. And again, we'll be looking at those schools where we know children will benefit the most.
But what particular characteristics did you look at when choosing the schools? The announcement said these are schools where there are tranches of children who are suffering from deprivation. So did you use a decile rating or what characteristics?
Not just decile, but we are looking at those areas where we know there is a lower socio-economic population around. So we know there is poverty being experienced in the community. But for the early schools, we also, as I've said, we're looking for schools that can help us design the program going forward. What we've done here is not said that there'll only be one way of delivering this program. Within each school, we expect that they may choose to do it a little bit differently. I've talked to some schools, for instance, who've suggested they might like to try and create employment out of this program, so make the school lunches themselves as a way of having a double benefit for their community. Others may choose to contract, say, a local bakery. So we'll work alongside those schools and get a real sense of what's going to work best. At the same time, it does matter having a supportive community. So that's part of our consultation, going out with the Ministry of Education and finding a mixture of those kinds of schools.
I do want to talk about delivery in more detail, but first off, why not go universal? Why not remove the potential for stigma and put it across the board?
Well, I agree with you on the question of stigma. Any school that we go into, every child will be provided with a lunch. Some programs you might have heard in the past selectively provide food for just single students who may need it. We don't want to stigmatise children, so wherever we go, it will be for every child in that school. As I've said, we are for this program. We want to get the design right, but we'll scale up to 20,000 children by 2021, and that'll give us a chance to see the real benefit and the impact in the communities where we're working. And that'll then be a choice for that government of that day, which I hope will be us, to determine what we do next with that. But at this stage, we are quite focused on those children we know will benefit the most.
Is it a cost thing to not roll it out universally? Because even if you give all the kids in one school lunch, it is a decile rating by another measure, isn't it? People will look at that school and go, oh, that's a food in schools school.
And look, this at the moment is an investment of over $40 million to deliver this program over 2 years. But we want to look at the results that it generates and be able to make the case then for what happens next with the program. So I take the point you're making, but at the same time, I want to make sure we get this right, first of all, and then start looking at whether or not there would be that wider benefit to go even further than that again. I expect there would be, but let's let the program run and then see those results. At the same time, Lisa, I do think it's important to point out we do ultimately need to solve the core of this issue, which is child poverty and inadequate incomes for families. We have put in the families package, 380,000 families benefiting from that lift in income. In the last budget, we had another package again focused on families that were really doing it tough.
And
we do want to solve the core problem, but this is alongside that.
So, Prime Minister, why then the decision to do it this way rather than put this money directly into the pockets of families?
And we've done both. So the vast majority of our initiatives have been directly into the pockets of families.
Why not
so
this
for
one,
380,000.
Sorry to interrupt, Prime Minister, but you'll be
again,
aware the welfare group, obviously your own welfare group, suggested raising benefits. So I'm just wondering, what consideration did you give to putting this particular pot of money straight back to families?
Well, I'm happy to answer that. In the 2019, the budget we've just had, we spent over $500 million on a package that did just that, and that went straight to families through things like indexing benefits to wages, and that's just so we don't continue to get that massive lag that we have at the moment with families falling further and further behind. Now, when you take into consideration that what we're doing here is roughly over $40 million, you can get huge reach with a program like that. If you then just put that simply into those other reforms, that just costs a much larger amount, but we have done both. The issue for us is we know it's going to take time for us to turn around child poverty in this country. We've set ambitious targets to do it, but at the same time I'm not willing for children day in, day out to go to school without having the food that they need and being ready to learn. So it's about doing both.
So in terms of delivery, are you specifying the type of food here? Will it be sustainable? Will the food come locally, or how's it going to work?
Yeah, so we are going to make sure that there will be guidelines. There'll be guidelines that just set out the expectation that I think everyone would have, that when a lunch is being provided, that it'll be a healthy lunch. And then beyond that, we'll be working, as I say, to make sure alongside schools that we work up some of the other expectations. And so that's why we're starting with a smaller group and then scaling up to those 20,000 children, because those are things we want to design together.
How much of the budget is for, capital investment? Like, will schools need kitchens? Will they need facilities to heat up food, refrigerators and things like that?
Yeah, good question. That's why it'll be designed school by school. Some schools, for instance, like area schools, often may have some of those facilities, and they may choose to prepare the lunches within their own school, and that might provide an employment opportunity. We've built in a per child cost and a few overhead costs as well. You'll forgive me for not giving you the precise numbers child by child, because we do want to allow schools to be able to negotiate if they choose to bring in a provider to be able to do that competitively. But each school may choose to do it differently, and that's what we're going to test over the next year.
The government already contributes to a number of programs that put food in some level into schools, like Kickstart and Fruit in Schools. Why not use some of those programs and utilise that infrastructure and know-how rather than set up a totally separate entity?
And there will be things we can learn from those, but the ones you've just named, Fruit in Schools, obviously not as comprehensive as a Lunch in Schools program. Kickstart, we have breakfast programs offered in different parts of the country, and we will test how this lunch program interacts with that. But of course, it's not the kind of reach necessarily that we've talked about in terms of universalism, in terms of reaching the number in all cases, as the examples you've provided. And so those are things we will, as we go, check how this program may work alongside some of those others, but many schools have neither.
I know you have to go, you're pressed for time, but do you anticipate those other programs you've just talked about will continue to be funded?
I do. We're not anticipating changing anything here with that. You'll know that some of those programs, for instance, are provided alongside the business community. We don't anticipate that changing. We certainly wouldn't like to see that change. This is a program that's about providing a healthy lunch, midway through the day, keep children ready to learn and ready to engage. And we'll be doing it universally within a school to make sure that we benefit as many children as possible without creating any stigma.
And that's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.